Well, good morning. Here we are starting a new study in Daniel. As you know, we finished up Ezekiel, and this is the book right after Ezekiel. And Daniel was a young man that served King Nebuchadnezzar and several other kings during his captivity. We are in Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 21. And the title of the lesson is Integrity Established. Integrity is established. Integrity means uprightness or honor or honesty, completeness, soundness. It says believers can live with integrity, with uprightness or honesty when tempted to compromise. Now, even though our study is verses 8 through 21, I want to go back and read the beginning of Daniel to give you some idea of where we are. Daniel in Nebuchadnezzar's court. During the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it with his armies. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah. When Nebuchadnezzar returned to Babylon, he took with him some of the sacred objects of the temple of God and placed them in the treasure house of his God in the land of Babylonia. Verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, who was in charge of the palace officials, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good sense, and have the poise needed to serve in the royal palace. Teach these young men the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily ration of the best food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for a 3-year period, and then some of them would be made his advisors in the royal court. Verse 6, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief official renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Now, a little background on Babylonia. Babylonia, at that time, was the ruling nation. In fact, they were in the process, or had conquered most of the known world at that time. And Babylonia, the city of Babylon, was beautiful. Nebuchadnezzar had a knack for continually building and beautifying Babylonia, or Babylon. In fact, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which he built for one of his wives, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. There are ruins today, which I'm not sure where in the Old Testament, but testified, God prophesies that Babylon would one day be completely ruined, and only the wild animals of the desert would live there. And that came to pass. But the city of Babylon was huge. I want to read some here. Ancient historians have said that its walls was 60 miles around, 15 miles on each side, 300 feet high, 80 feet thick, and 35 feet under the ground so that the enemy could not dig into it. And each brick was 1 foot square and 3 or 4 inches thick. So it was a huge complex, very well fortified. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was the son of the ruling king at that time. His name was Nabopolassar. That's the best I can do on that one. But he ruled Babylon until 606, when Nebuchadnezzar, who had been made leader of the armies and had been very successful with conquering surrounding nations, came to co-rule with him. And then in 604 BC, when his dad died, Nebuchadnezzar became the ruler. Now, he ruled for 70 years, and this is the same length of time that Judah was captive. And so Daniel and these three other guys, Hananiah, Mishael, or Azariah, or Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, were taken captivity, and they were between the ages of 13 and 17, and they had royal heritage in them, which went back to I think King Zedekiah, and it was evidently the rule or the custom of Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm sure other kings, to take the cream of the crop from a conquered nation and bring them and basically reprogram them into their kingdom, their ways, and their language and stuff. Number one, this helped keep the captives in line, saying that, you've got no power except what I give you. And this helped them to overcome a lot of possible rebellions. But also, he used them in his courts to further his knowledge of things and his control of things. And so these four young men became captive. This was during the first series of captivities that we read. Now, you remember last study we had Ezekiel. He was taken in the second round of captivity from Judah, but Daniel was in the first. In fact, he served the complete reign of Babylon, which was 70 years, even into the reign of Darius the Mede and Cyrus. Now, if you remember, King Cyrus, after his third year of reign, he was Persian. God moved into his heart to let the Jews go back and rebuild Jerusalem. So Daniel was in the midst of all this captivity and beyond. So that's where we are right now. And so we have these four guys, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, captive. And the king wants to put them in his courts and to teach them their ways. He wanted only the brightest and best of the captives, excuse me. And so these four men were chosen because of their heritage, being related to a former king, because of their looks, and because of basically their intelligence. And so we have the setup here where the king wanted these captivities, these four guys and others, to only eat from what the king's table was, which was rich in foods. Now, this brings us to our lesson today. And the first part of the lesson is verses 8 through 10, a commitment expressed. Verse 8, but Daniel made up his mind, or his heart, not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given by the king. He asked the chief official for permission to eat other things instead. Now God had given the chief official great respect for Daniel, but he was alarmed by Daniel's suggestion. My lord, the king has ordered that you eat this food and wine, he said. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded for neglecting my duties. And so Daniel had found a friend, if you were, in this official that had been signed to him and the other young men to fatten up and to teach them. But Daniel didn't want that because, number one, the Jews, had a strict diet when it came to animals and such. In fact, over in Leviticus, it tells us about the animals, those with cloven hoods, those with full hooves, those with chewed cud, the birds, no insects and stuff like that. And so the food that was being prepared by the king's kitchen did not meet their Jewish menu. They were not kosher, if you would. And number two, this food had primarily first been offered to their idols, which would defile Daniel, the other Jewish guys, by eating things offered to idols. And so this might have seemed like a small thing to give into, but God was with Daniel, and he did not want to defile. Daniel did not want to defile his heritage, his upbringing, his Jewish traditions and stuff. This is what God had ordained in Leviticus, and this is what he followed. And so it may seem like a small thing, but the thing is, if you give into small temptations, to give into, give up some of your small ideas, it's easier to give up bigger ones come around the next time. And that's just like today. If we forego some of the things that we know we should stand for concerning God, if we don't adhere to the small ones, how are we going to adhere to the bigger ones? And just the vice versa. If we give in here and there, what keeps us from giving in more and more? And so Daniel had his mindset, his heart set on following the Jewish custom of eating kosher foods, those that he knew were drained of blood, that fell into the categories of what they could eat. And so Daniel is setting his precedents, and he's talking to this guy who he is friends with. And the guy, I feel, understood, but yet he was in fear of his own life, because it was up to him to keep these guys, getting them educated, getting them fat or healthy, if you would, so that after the 3 years, when it came time to appear before the king, they were none of the worse for wear, that they measured up to what the king's standards were. So here we have the dilemma. The guy understands what Samuel's wanting to do, and he sympathized with him, but he's also looking out for his own neck, which you can't blame him. So the next part is a test passed. This is verses 11 through 16. So Daniel talked it over with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief official to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's rich food. Then you can decide whether or not to let us continue eating our diet. Verse 14. So the attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. Verse 15. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned to them by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the rich foods and wines. All right? So Daniel goes to the guy who is immediately over him and presents the same idea. And so the guy goes along with it. Now, you've got to see that God's hand was in this from the start. these four guys, even though taken by Nebuchadnezzar into captivity, yet these were going to be God's men to serve him in this heathen court, especially Daniel. And so God moves in this official's heart, this attendant, and says, okay. Now, he was fearful too. But Daniel, inspired by God, said, well, listen, let's do this. Let's eat. Let me and my friends eat nothing but vegetables and water, and skip the diet from the king's table for 10 days. And then after 10 days, if we look any different, if we look worse, we'll give in and eat what the king orders. And that's my promise to you. So God was working in this. Sure, I'm sure this was a much healthier diet, but the thing is, Daniel was upholding his faith in God and what he had been taught through the Jewish religion to honor God by what he eats. And so God was working in this. And so there's no way it was going to fail. And so the guy says, okay, 10 days and I'll check you out. Well, after 10 days, what's it say? So after that, at the end of 10 days, Daniel and his three friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young man who had been eating the food from the king's table. God worked in these guys' lives to not only keep them healthy, but even look better. Now, I don't know what kind of food they ate, the other guys, but I'm sure it was rich. I'm sure it was fattening, and maybe to an extent not healthy. But what Daniel ate was according to God's will, and they came out for the better. And so, to me, this is saying that as long as we follow God's ways, God's rules in our lives, we'll prosper. Maybe not become rich or famous or anything, but we will be better off for doing that than if we'd gone our own way and did our own thing. You know, it's just a gimme to me that as long as we follow God, we can't go wrong. And this is the mindset of Daniel. Hey, I'm not giving in. And another thing is that if they had given in to the food, then they've compromised some, and basically eating the food of the king and everything was like, in a way, fellowshipping with the king. And they wanted to remain Jews and God's people. And it all goes back again to giving up their beliefs, compromising their beliefs to get by. But that wasn't Daniel's way. And so here we have them not only surviving, but even thriving with this diet. Then what's it say? So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the rich foods and wines. And so God is, meeting the needs of Daniel and his three companions, honoring their will to serve him and to stay the course. And God's rewarding them with this. And it's physically showing to this attendant. Now, the next part is a recognized difference, verses 17 through 21. God gave these four young men an unusual aptitude for learning the literature and science of the time. And God gave Daniel special ability in understanding the meanings of visions and dreams, which come up later on into the book. When the 3-year training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief official brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 19. The king talked with each of them, and none of them impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they were appointed to his regular staff of advisors. In all matters requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, the king found the advice of these young men to be 10 times better than that of all the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Verse 21. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus's reign. So, the result, not only did they look better, but God enhanced their learning and their knowledge, and they outdid all the other guys. In fact, King Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed, what's it say? That he was impressed that none of the other guys impressed him as much as Daniel and his 3 companions. God had worked in Daniel's life to bring him to the forefront because God had a plan for Daniel and his cohorts, especially Daniel. He was there for a purpose, God's purpose. And as we go through Daniel, we'll learn more and more about that, what that purpose was. But God honored Daniel's commitment to him and rewarded him in such a way as that his wisdom, or Daniel and his friends, they had more wisdom and balanced judgment than all the young men, 10 times more. It wasn't just a little bit. God rewarded him with 10 times more the ability than the other men. And so, as God honored Daniel, he and his friends became prominent within the king's court. It said, even more than all the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. These were guys that the king looked to give him guidance through the stars, through the worship of their idols and stuff. Daniel and his friends outshone all of them to the point. Now it goes on verse 21. It said, Daniel remained there till the first year of King Cyrus's reign. And he was a Persian. Now, the thing is that Daniel not only served Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, ruled for 45 years. And then after that, there was 5 other kings, some good, some bad. Then he ruled during, I forget, I said it earlier, a Mede king, and then King Cyrus. And so the 70 years that the Babylonians ruled was the same length of time and the same time period that Judah was captivity in Babylon. And then at the end of that, as I said earlier, when King Cyrus came into power, God moved in King Cyrus's heart to let some of the captives go back to Jerusalem and rebuild Jerusalem. He even footed the bill for that. But the thing is that what's important is see how God is moving in the life of not only Daniel and his 3 friends, but also in King Nebuchadnezzar's life, and how God is setting up the idea of using Daniel in mighty ways. It talked about how God blessed him with visions and dreams, and these become important later on in the chapter. But the thing is, you go back and look, and Daniel was taken in the first round of captivities, Ezekiel in the second round of captivities, and there were in 586 BC, he again attacked Jerusalem and burned it and took captivities. And then 581 BC, he took more. And Nebuchadnezzar died in 561 BC. But all during this reign, Daniel served God and this heathen king. And so, to me, what I get out of this is that when we commit our lives to God to serve Him, we have to serve Him in all capacities. And that once we give in to something that is not God's will, we become weak. And it's easier to give in the next time and the next time. And a little compromise can turn into a bigger one and a bigger one to where you're way off the track. So like Daniel, we need to make up in our heart and mind to serve God to the best of our ability and to follow Him wherever it takes us. And that's not easy. I'm not saying it is. But God, He enabled Daniel to do this. He can enable us to do this also. It's just a matter of sticking to our beliefs, drawing up of God's strength to help us through the compromising times so that we come out the other side even better than before. Just like Daniel and his friends. They started out good, but they came better and better because of their following and fellowship with God. Let's have a word of prayer. Dear God, I thank you for the example of Daniel and his friends, dear Lord. And I just ask, dear God, that you help me to not compromise, to help me to resist, dear God, to giving an inch, because once an inch is given, the devil can get it to a mile. So help me, help us, dear God, to do your will at all times and always, knowing that you're there supporting us, guiding us, strengthening us, dear God. And we just give you praise for that. We thank you, God, for loving us, and we love you. Amen. Next week, as we continue our study in Daniel, it's demonstrate allegiance. Demonstrate allegiance. This will be in Daniel chapter 3, verses 14 through 26. Daniel 3, 14 through 26. I would encourage you to get a head start and read. And it's Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue is what the drift of the story is. But if you'll read chapter 2, it talks about Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Remember, it said that God blessed him with the understanding the meanings of visions and dreams. Well, Daniel gets a head start, and in chapter 2, he begins his ministry by doing this. So I encourage you to read chapter 2, read chapter 3, get a head start on it, and then we'll go from there. I look forward to being in this study with you, and I think we'll have a good time and learn something. Y'all stay safe, stay well, God bless you, and I love you.